Here we are, episode 0 of the new podcast, or live stream actually. We're like one step above podcasts since we're live streaming this thing.
We got video, we got Jack Murphy.
And we got you.
I'm here.
Let me see, since this is our first time doing it, I just want to make sure that the stream is actually up. We're actually streaming something and not just talking to ourselves, which is okay. Yeah, it's up. We are streaming. Cool.
I'm going to get a little casual at my vape because I am a slave to nicotine and I got my Mountain Dew.
That's cool. All right, I'm just going to fire the links out there so people can come and check it out.
So I quit drinking like a year and a half ago, but I still feel like a drug addict because the caffeine is so hard to quit, and I abused it for so many years. And I really abused caffeine, and I'm starting to wonder, how it's going to be, with my health and with my heart, things like that. I'm kind of like 29, I'm about to turn 30, and I'm wondering have I done irreparable damage?
Through the caffeine or the alcohol?
The caffeine.
I mean, I don't think you can see it, but I have a huge thermos here filled with coffee right in front of me.
Yeah, it's like all day. I don't know about you, but I drink coffee and soda all day.
I mean, I think, the sugar in soda is bad for you, but like caffeine, I think it's okay until you reach a certain age and then it starts to fuck with your heart, I believe.
Yeah. Well, I wrote that story last year about the Bang Energy that has like 300 milligrams of caffeine. And it's not that that's like a high amount on its own, but like if you chug it, like I chug it, I mean, that's a lot of caffeine to take in at one time.
But yeah, I mean, I feel like I wake up in the morning and I drink coffee until like maybe 5 or 6 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
And it's a good thing I only drink once a week now. Otherwise, I would just drink coffee up until 5 or 6 and then just start drinking beer.
Do the switch.
And that would be bad for you.
My old editor at the Daily Caller said he had some beers with me one time. Jeff Ingersoll.
What about him?
He said that you and him had some beers one time.
Jeffrey? Yeah, years ago, many years ago,
yeah.
When he was working at Business Insider.
That's right, he was a Business Insider. He was at Marine Corps Times, too.
Yeah? Where's he at now?
He's the editor-in-chief for the Daily Caller.
Oh, really? Good for him.
Yeah. I mean, I gotta say, Jeffrey is a jam-up boss, and the way he commanded that newsroom is impressive. And he's a good dude. He was always a straight shooter, and he runs that organization real well. So, but yeah, when I interviewed there several months ago, I introduced myself. He was like, "Oh yeah, I'm a Jack Murphy. We got some beers." So, kind of helped me get in there, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I haven't talked to him in a long time. I'm glad to hear he's doing well, though.
Yeah, he's doing real well. So what do you got? What's going on with you? What's doing in your life?
Jeez. What is going on? I mean, as many people know, maybe like the whole 3 or 4 people who tune into this, I record a normal a podcast twice a week. That's been running for a long time, maybe like 450 some odd episodes. And it kind of went on hiatus. So on the suggestion of some friends, they said, well, why don't you just start your own podcast? And I was like, well, I have all the equipment to do audio and video already. So yeah, so I came into the studio after doing some writing this morning, and you volunteered to be the first guest on episode 0 and suck it up through the many technical difficulties that I'm already having. So just to point out, there is a way to have a person call in on Skype or a similar program and import that directly into the program and the hardware that does live streaming. In this case, I have a TriCaster. And then there's also, you can hardwire it in, or there's a program that would allow you to connect to the network and then stream it directly into the hardware. Long story short, we're actually doing it like the most ridiculous way, that there's a second camera here, and Joey is being projected onto a television screen, and the camera is pointing at the television screen. And it looks okay for the first episode, but I'm horrified to even think of what the audio must sound like.
I never have good audio anyways, though. So you can blame it on me. The first episode we did, I flipped my pen through it, the entire thing.
Yes, I recall.
The second one, I was in this chair, and I kept squeaking the chair. The third one was fine, and then the one we just did, I was on about the landline in the newsroom here, and it was like, it didn't sound great, so you can blame it on me. I just got a bad track record with it. So would you, anything good, you write anything good this morning?
Writing anything, like this week?
Yeah, when you said you did some writing this morning.
Yeah. So I did an article about an interesting piece that came up. There's this guy, he runs, I guess he's a YouTuber. He's a weapons historian and does YouTube videos called Bloke on the Range. And he got access to what is now a museum piece, is a G150, and it's a highly specialized suppressed rifle. So I hesitate to call it a sniper rifle. It shoots subsonic rounds, and it has an integral suppressor. There's probably 100 or maybe 200 of most of these things made in Switzerland, and they were put into Cold War stockpiles for stay-behind networks. So a lot of people are familiar with the various infiltration techniques that special operations or clandestine units might use. You can air, land, and sea, basically is what it boils down to. So you can parachute in, either free fall or static line. You can swim in with subsurface equipment, with rebreathers, or come over the horizon in small inflatable rafts like Zodiacs. You could walk across an international border wearing a disguise of some sort. You could hide inside a 10th Special Forces group. I think they just hid in the back of pickup trucks and were driven across the border from Turkey into Iraq in 2003. So land, sea, and air. But there's a fourth infiltration technique called stay-behinds, and those are cells that are trained in sabotage and espionage, and they would be living off the civilian economy in an area that is expected to be invaded by the enemy. So in this case, we're talking about the Soviet Union. The U.S. Army had a unit called Detachment A, and they were active duty Green Berets, American soldiers in Berlin, and that was their mission. If the Soviets ever pushed across the wall and invaded West Berlin and West Germany, which would, of course, trigger World War III essentially, these stay-behind units would already be in place. And once the Soviet front lines pushed over them, they would activate and begin blowing up electrical stations, sabotaging train tracks, basically just sabotaging and wreaking havoc in what had become the enemy's rear areas. And the interesting thing is there were stay-behind networks all over Western Europe that were trained by the CIA, by MI6. They operated under the auspices of NATO for the most part, but the problem and why they became very controversial is because, at least in countries like Italy and Holland, they were hijacked by criminal elements and used for domestic terrorist attacks. Kind of a worse.
The weapons or the actual
The actual cells were being used to commit domestic terrorism. So it's like a worst case scenario. It was so bad, it's called Italy's Years of Lead, where they were just blowing up civilians and train stations. I mean, just really horrible stuff. In Holland, there's a grocery store that was attacked. And then in Switzerland, the country we started off talking about, the P26 network, what happened was when it was exposed in 1989, it turned out that P26 and the intelligence service attached to it, P27, had dossiers on 900,000 Swiss citizens.
It's a lot. guys.
A
That's a lot of people.
massive domestic surveillance. And to bring it back to this particular weapon, the G150, it was labeled, it was funny that the Swiss call it an anti-material rifle.
Mm-hmm.
So they say it's for sabotaging, destroying equipment, right?
Right.
Now, a subsonic bullet that small is not taking out any pieces of equipment. It's just not happening.
Yeah.
So it's called that for reasons of political correctness more than anything. It's clearly a weapon that's designed for assassinations.
When there's been when you say assassinations, are you talking about government sanctioned assassinations, or are you talking about what you talking about Italy, like a hijacked third actor type assassination, or could it be both?
I think it started off as one, and unfortunately, in a couple countries at least, it became the latter. So it's perfectly legitimate to arm clandestine stay-behind cells to fight an invading army, and to kill a uniformed enemy soldier is lawful. It's lawful under the Geneva Conventions, and there's nothing illegal or immoral about that. But the problem was that P26 is one example where it had no accountability to the Swiss Parliament, which was another part of the scandal. But really none of these groups did. I mean, the ones in Italy clearly were not accountable to anyone except some very nefarious behind-the-scenes interests, some of the puppet masters at the time. So I think that they all started with good intentions and were hijacked by criminal elements as time went on.
It's always interesting to me to hear about different units and different, people that kind of go off the reservation like that. Like the Colonel Kurtz fantasy from Apocalypse Now. There was a guy I remember reading about, and he was a Green Beret colonel or major in Afghanistan. And they kind of said that he was like the quote-unquote Colonel Kurtz of Afghanistan, because he had essentially moved into this village and lived there, and he brought his wife over, or his girlfriend at the time. Do you remember anything about that?
Yeah, you're talking about Jim Gant. Yeah, Jim Gant was a very interesting guy. He didn't kind of go native, that was the accusation. And if you look for it, he penned a paper called One Village at a Time. Mm-hmm. And the problem, the two different approaches. So Gant's approach was that he said, look, this is a tribal society in Afghanistan. We have to approach each tribe individually and approach it as its own entity and negotiate with it. And I think his point was, it is what it is. This is a tribal society, so we have to work through the tribal structure of this country. But our government, the thing about the United States in particular, is we think that every country around the world should look like us as far as the structure of our government. So our government looked at people like Gant and said, well, thanks for your opinion, but we want to create a federalized democratic system. And obviously that is not really what Afghanistan is oriented towards.
Right.
And we've been trying to fit a square peg in a round hole for a long time over there. And I think Gant's approach was, certainly the right one. He said, look, it's a tribal society, so we have to address the tribes. I had a similar conversation with a guy who specializes in political economy at one point, but that's a whole different conversation.
It kind of reminds me, and this is a totally different conversation as well, but, last year when I was at XCTC, I was talking to some of the guys from the First Army. They're trade-off, but they're First Army guys, and their job is essentially to train guard soldiers. And there was an interesting conversation we had about, how the training and the different training events and exercises that the military does are geared more towards the threats that we're expected to face and facing. And so my takeaway wasn't that there's kind of a paradigm shift right now between we were fighting insurgency in Afghanistan. Obviously we were fighting insurgency in Iraq. But then prior to that, we fought the Iraqi army for a couple of months. But now you look at kind of the global threat picture, and it's really a mixed bag. So I wonder, and this would be an interesting thing to explore, is how the military is trying to, train, get its soldiers trained on both, a near-peer force, and still do the insurgency mission. Those are two very different approaches to warfare.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And part of the problem too is that what we do is when we try to train our allied forces around the world is that we mirror U.S. military doctrine. So you take it was FM 7-8 was the infantry handbook. It has a different number now. It's sacrilege that they ever changed it. But nonetheless, we take our doctrine, we can say infantry doctrine in this case, and we teach it to people in Mali, in Guinea-Bissau. I don't know if we have troops there, but we go to the Congo, we go to Poland, we go to Latvia, we go to the Philippines, we go to Thailand, we go to all these different places, and we teach them U.S. military doctrine that is made for U.S. military forces. But the U.S. military functions as a combined joint environment that brings to bear all of our air support, our artillery, our the most robust logistics network in the world, which none of these other countries have access to.
The logistics side of the U.S. is something that I find super interesting. It may not be interesting on the surface, but once you see it being undertaken, it's really like a mammoth operation. Fuel, food, the medicine part's interesting, but even laundry. That's something that I never would have thought about. I interviewed an Army lieutenant, and he was like, "Yeah, we're here to do the laundry in the field." And he was stoked about it. He was excited. And, he knew exactly how many garments he washed per day and things like that. And it's something that on the civilian side, something I never would have thought about. How do they wash their clothes?
Yeah, I remember when the French went into Mali. It was probably 5-6 years ago now. The French were contracting. 2012.
Yeah,
something like that.
11.
Yeah, it was a while back now. And they were contracting civilian aircraft to fly their soldiers down there. And I said to a friend of mine at the time, I was like, why in the hell are they doing that? Why don't they just take French military aircraft and fly their soldiers there? And he was like, Jack, no other country in the world has the lift capability that the United States does. Those aircraft you're talking about, the French don't have them.
So that's an interesting thing. I wrote a story, I was with the Daily Caller full-time on their fact-check team for about a month. And I left because it was taking me 3 hours each way to get to the office. The Daily Caller was great. Like I said, Jeff was great. And, it was a great job just for me. It was really hard to get there. And so I ended up working at a local news site. But one of the stories I wrote was a claim for Bernie Sanders that said, does the U.S. military spend as much as the next 10 countries combined? And the answer is more or less yes. But what we came across was, number one, we rely on these countries to report their spending honestly. Who's to say that they're doing that? And number two, what you're talking about, is mixed use equipment. So if China, for example, builds transport vessels that can be used to transport military equipment, to transport troops, they might not consider that quote-unquote military spending.
Right.
So their military spending on paper might look a lot less than ours. But, and I'm wondering, from reading a lot about the maritime issues and the maritime community, the U.S. has the merchant marine, but it's nowhere near as robust as a lot of these other countries that really rely on trade. The shipping trades, but we do too. We're more importers and exporters. But it just makes you think that there's probably a lot of pieces of equipment and pieces of logistics that are not counted as military spending, but they are most definitely, can be conscripted into military service. It's just interesting when you look at the numbers numbers of, like the U.S., like we needed to go to say, let's say if we went to Mali, right? If we were going to send a special forces team to Mali, like we're going to fly them in, most likely, USAF aircraft. It's interesting that these countries, they just don't have that capability.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing you have to keep in mind too is that there's no other country in the world that has the global mandate that the United States does. So when we train an infantry unit, we need them to be able to, as we were saying earlier, fight a counterinsurgency campaign in the Middle East. We need them to be prepared to fight a conventional military threat in Eastern Europe. We may need them to wage some sort of expeditionary warfare in the South China Sea. They need to be able to fight in the Arctic. They might have to jump into the Arctic Circle and fight in the most austere conditions in the world.
Do you think though that in some ways small unit tactics is small unit tactics?
To a large extent, yeah, and that's why we have like battle drills and things like that, and then it's on the commanders and the small unit leaders to adjust the tactics accordingly. I mean, that's why we hope that's the difference between an American soldier and the way a lot of other countries do, is that the small unit leader can adapt to the environment that he's placed in, and that we should allow him to do that. But it goes back to what I was saying when we train our allies. If you're in northern Syria, training Kurdish guerrillas to fight like American infantrymen is absolutely ridiculous. It's completely ridiculous.
And forgive my ignorance, what about it makes it ineffective? I mean, are we talking about training as in, how they move, how they fight, like the limited advance type stuff? Or are we talking about more of like an overall strategy? Kind of get into that.
I mean, both. If they don't have the same sort of air support or let's say armor that Americans have that can come in backfill areas and secure areas, if they don't have the logistics infrastructure to support what American tactics can accomplish, then it's kind of pointless to teach them those things. I mean, just like a smaller example, like if they don't have the types of machine guns that Americans have, then they cannot do the same fire and maneuver tactics that American soldiers do. So it's not, my point is not that American military tactics are bad or wrong, but rather that it's a big mistake for us to try to mirror those tactics in our allies rather than tailoring the training towards the specific situation that they're in.
I'm sure they're trying to make some kind of training that is, modular or universal to some degree. I
mean, sometimes if it's a counterinsurgency campaign, I mean, God's honest truth is, the best thing you can train those guys to do is to take rat poison and infiltrate into the enemy's camp and poison their well, or to give them snub-nosed 38s and have them go off and conduct assassinations of the enemy's key leadership. I mean, I know it's not exactly politically correct, you're not allowed to use words like assassination, but I mean, those are probably more legitimate and effective tactics if you're dealing with a rather underfunded, under-equipped guerrilla force.
The political correctness of war is interesting to me, from an outsider's perspective. And a couple of years ago, there was the debate over whether or not to allow women in common arms. And I was talking to my wife about it because my wife's a badass. She's a rugby player. She's really smart. And she was like, "Yeah, I think they should be allowed in." And I said, and I have no opinion whether they should or should not. I don't remember one. I've never served, so it's on some parts I'm speaking from a position of ignorance. And number two, I've known a lot of chicks and women in my life that I think are more than capable to do that job. But I remember seeing a study, and it might have been in a book. They're saying that men would be more upset emotionally seeing a woman, disfigured or hurt than it would be a man. And she said, "Well, how come it's the woman's fault that the man would get more upset?" And I said, "Well, it's not the woman's fault. But when you're talking about the military, I think we should focus on, what's going to be the most effective, because the job is to win battles. I think in a large way, when you're talking assassinations, stuff like that, doesn't look good, but if it's effective, I think maybe the military should just focus on what's effective. Because wasn't there a quote from one of the World War I generals that said that the most humane way to fight a war is to do it quickly?
Yeah.
So what's a better way to do it? Assassinate one or two people, or fight a full-scale invasion?
Well, yeah, of course, it's preferable that wars are brutal, short, and decisive. But I think there's an interesting movement. I mean, it's related to American, Western society, is that we have this very intangible need for our military to be a reflection of every one of our progressive, liberal Western values. And that comes in a direct conflict with war itself, because war is not a very good representation of our progressive liberal values in America. In some ways, you could argue that it's a failure of those values, that it's the breakdown of them, and then how do you respond to that? So I think this is where there's a big ideological conflict in the minds of not just America, but I think in the Western world. How do we handle this? Like, why does a military that is designed to do something brutal and horrible, and Western democracies can be incredibly violent. Like, let's not kid ourselves about this. Why do we need the military to be a focal point or a role model for our progressive liberal values? And to me, it's like there's a group of people out there, and they want the military to be something that it can never be. And it's really not a good place to look for role models for those type of values either. I mean,
I think they asked the military to do way more than it was ever designed to do. I mean, it's kind of the stopgap measure that the U.S. has whenever a situation, whatever the situation is that occurs abroad. We'll send the military.
Oh yeah.
Okay, well, is that really what they are trying to do? Like, for example, in 2014, we sent military personnel to West Africa for the Ebola outbreak. We sent medical troops there, but at the end of the day, like, they're not trained to set up field hospitals. Well, they are trained to set up field hospitals, but they're trained to set up field hospitals in support of U.S. military operations. They're not, explicitly trained how to set up military operations and work with a foreign government and NGOs, but like autonomously.
Yeah, I mean, we deployed to Iraq during the heyday, all of these National Guard units and reservists who were not even remotely qualified or prepared to wage a counterinsurgency campaign. And I don't say that as a ding against those guys who got called up and deployed. They answered a call and they went and they did their job as best they could. But what I am saying, it's wrong to deploy soldiers for a mission that they don't know how to do and are not prepared for.
In 05, go ahead.
Well, I was just reiterating, like you said, we throw the military at every problem that comes up. I mean, from a counterinsurgency, some bushfire war in some foreign country Americans have never heard of before, to hurricane disaster relief. So
that's the thing. Everyone, I've had a lot of people ask me that, I spent a lot of time with Louisiana National Guard. And in 05, when Hurricane Katrina hit, the majority of the, combat arms troops in the Louisiana National Guard, the entire 256 Infantry Brigade was deployed to Iraq when the hurricane hit. So the state they found out, oh shit, we are, all this manpower that we, wanted to have and account for in a disaster is simply not available. The National Guard takes an active role in hurricane response, and they train for it. And that's kind of the difference between the active duty side and the guard side, is there are guardsmen who, that's like their full-time job is training for, civil defense and things like that. But when they're gone, out of state, out of the country, doing a different mission, they're no longer available to the government. So when the entire city of New Orleans floods and all of your manpower is out of state, well then you're in a situation where you're relying on, civilian volunteers and, asking other states to send guardsmen, you're asking the president to send in federal troops, but, when you look at that, the governor of the state has to formally request troops from the president in this situation. So it's, especially with the Guard, I mean, I spent a lot of time with them. I think they're really proficient soldiers, but we kind of do ourselves a service when we send them off to do jobs that they're not trained for to do. And then we have an emergency at home that we really could use their expertise at, they're not available. And it's also not fair to ask a guy, he does a 12-month deployment in Iraq, a combat deployment, and they lose guys, and they come back to the States, and then their entire community floods, and they have to work for months and months and months trying to get it back. I mean, you're not getting, the most effective soldier.
Yeah, a friend of mine was in the 82nd and got deployed down for Katrina.
Yeah.
He said by the time they got there, it was pretty much all over, though.
Yeah, I think it was like about a week from the time it hit to the time when they started getting things stabilized. But, the humanitarian mission in New Orleans continued for a long time. But I think the military's role was about a week to 2 weeks. But don't quote me on that.
Yeah, I think it was more PR at that point because, the White House was getting so much bad press. And of course, the government of Louisiana, the state government, was getting a lot of bad press for how poorly it was handled.
Yeah, they could have handled that better. There really isn't like a dedicated civil defense like there used to be, I guess, in the 1950s and 60s. I mean, we have FEMA, but FEMA doesn't really necessarily, they don't employ troops, they don't employ, rescuers, they're kind of the facilitator, and we rely on, municipalities and states to provide the manpower. But, I was reading about Chernobyl. There was the HBO show that just came on, but about a year ago, I read a book called Midnight of Chernobyl. They talked about the Soviets had all these civil defense troops that they could deploy, and they were, conscripted, employed by the military, trained by the military, but their job was explicitly civil defense. Now, I don't know anything other than select few units. I know the National Guard, Louisiana National Guard is I think a company-sized strength unit that can respond to environmental disasters, but other than very small units like that, we don't have civil defense troops.
No, not really. I know the Special Forces National Guard guys, those ODAs get called up for disaster relief and things like, I have friends who were called up for the Baltimore riots, and they were doing infrastructure security on some of the ports over there. And they had some interesting stories. They said that it was not anything like what you saw in the news. He was the protesters would come up to them and shake their hands, and it was not a problem at all.
Have you ever been to Baltimore?
No, I've driven through it, but.
Let's go. I love Baltimore, man.
Really?
I love Baltimore.
All I know about Baltimore is from watching The Wire.
Yeah, that's kind of me too. And I had some friends that we went to stay with them in Baltimore. That's the first thing I said. I was like, I watched The Wire. They're yeah, it's a lot more than just that. But It's really a cool city. The food's great. It's got this really interesting working class vibe that a lot of metropolitan centers don't have. It kind of reminds me in some ways of New Orleans, with the really good food and its own little microcosm of a culture, that some cities don't have. But it's a really cool spot. It's in my opinion, a very underrated city. I would gladly live there.
Yeah, I'm here in Brooklyn right now, very, this neighborhood is out and proud, loud and proud, but there's other parts of Manhattan that are I was thinking about this last night actually, that are just very odd. Have you ever been to the New York Stock Exchange?
No.
So I got called there once, and I was expecting, Gordon Gekko type stuff going on.
Yeah.
Get there, and it was a Monday morning. That place was a ghost town.
Really?
It was a ghost town. There's just like a couple, like the people who wear the brokers, whoever, wearing the jackets.
Yeah.
And there's just a couple of them, and they're sitting behind computer screens like half asleep, just like looking at stuff. There's nothing going on, and I started asking about it, and I was like, what the hell? This place is like, I expect to see tumbleweeds coming, down the New York Stock Exchange. And they're like, yeah, this thing, it's kind of like just like traditional or ceremonial, like because everything's done off-site now with, high-speed internet and everything else.
Yeah.
And I also ended up at the New York Times one Monday morning, and the same thing, the floor of the Times was just empty. There's just no one there. Like, I don't think I saw a single person sitting behind their desk working at the computer or anything else. And I don't know, I guess, but I mean, there's this aspect of Manhattan. It just feels like there's like a quote from Kierkegaard. He said something like, the facade was left standing, but it had been cleverly hollowed out of any content. It's like, feels that way in Manhattan sometimes. That
like, it's like a relic.
If you ever want to see like a glimpse at Manhattan's future, you can go visit Venice in Italy, because Venice for like 600 years was the economic capital of the world, and now it's like Disneyland. It's basically like very few people actually live in Venice, but cruise ships pull up every day and just unload people. And so like one day it'll be all Russians, the next day it'll be all Brits. It's a theme park.
That might be changing since that cruise ship crashed into the dock there a couple weeks ago.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask you about some of that stuff because I know you kind of have an interest in maritime security.
Yeah, can I grab my phone charger real quick?
Yeah, of course.
All right, can you carry this by yourself?
I got you, man. I got you.
Thanks, man. I'll be right back.
So for the, one or two people potentially watching this, we're calling this episode 0 of our live stream, because I'm kind of ironing out all the technical issues and don't know what the hell I'm doing here. But what is this podcast/live stream going to be about? I mean, feel free to chime in and give me your 2 cents. We've been talking some defense news and some military news and otherwise just bullshitting. I don't know what else to say right now, but we will, we're open. If you have any suggestions or ideas or topics you'd like us to cover, hit us up and let us know. Joey will be back in a minute. Is a friend of mine, also works as a journalist. He's covered veterans programs over the years, different kinds of VA programs. He's covered maritime security. He's done defense news. What else have you done, Joey?
He now works as a small-time newspaper reporter in West Virginia.
What's the name of the paper?
It's the Journal. So if you search the Journal West Virginia, can you hear me all right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, if you search the Journal West Virginia, I cover Jefferson County, which is in the eastern panhandle of the state. It's like been really eye-opening because, I read local news when I first started out, but then I joined the Daily Caller a couple months after that and started doing foreign policy stuff. I had a news rep, I did finance, foreign policy, maritime stuff. So this is really like my first full-time job doing local news. And it's been really eye-opening on how small-time issues have a big-time impact on people's lives. Like, for example, I did a whole thing about maritime law. And I found it really interesting. I was really interested in it, and people said they were interesting, but unless you're a seafarer or go on cruises a lot, it doesn't really affect your life. But if I do a story here about a new zoning law or things that are going on with the proposed factory, those have immediate, everyday impacts on people's lives. So for me, it's been really interesting to see, how local small-time journalism can still, in this day and age, have a big effect. So it's been fun. It's been really fun. I try to keep it low stress, and I still try to write about things that I'm interested in. But it's been a learning experience for me. It's been great. I still try to get out and cover some other stuff that I'm more interested in when I can. But yeah, I moved from Louisiana. Now I live in a small town, the Shenandoah Valley, with 3,000 people. I mean, I never thought I'd do that, and it's been really fun so far. Everyone keeps talking about the winters and the snow, like being from Louisiana, and I grew up in Florida. I've never really ever seen snow. I've never lived in it, and I'm going in cocky. I'm decided that's because of my attitude, which is it'll be no big deal, and we'll wait and see.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that, there have been so many of these small town papers collapsing and getting aggregated into like these larger and larger conglomerates, or just plain going out of business. And I know a lot has been written about that over the years, but.
It's hard. Print journalism is hard now because for it to be economically viable with and I think newspapers around the country are trying to figure out, how they can monetize web content to the point so that they can keep journalists employed. Because I think people rely on small town journalists, but at the same time, it can be hard to fund an operation like that. And to fund an operation do it well. It can be difficult. So I think the whole industry, and I'm not an expert in journalism. I work in it, but I wouldn't say I'm an expert. But I think the entire print media, especially the local papers, I don't know if they're struggling, but they're trying to find, how to survive in the 21st century and how to, what's the strategy going to be? Because when you talk to the community, they want it. It's something that they need. Like some of the towns that I write about have 200 or 300 people, and they rely on the local newspaper to know, to keep their elected officials honest, and to make sure that they know when a new company wants to move in. That's kind of been a lot of that I've been covering lately. There's a manufacturing company that's trying to move into the Eastern Panhandle, and about half of the citizens here want it because they want the jobs, and about the other half think it'll be an environmental disaster. The truth is probably somewhere in between. But just sorting through that, and people are really upset, and to the point. When I say people are upset, it's like the entire county is divided. It's almost scary, to see that still exists in America, in small town America.
Yeah, that's the thing is that, like rural, small town corruption is almost worse than big town corruption, because at least in major cities you have these big newspapers that cover these subjects, but in a small town in Nebraska, who's going to cover that stuff if all the small town papers have gone out of business?
Right, like Harper's Ferry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So Harper's Ferry, West Virginia, it's obviously John Brown, everyone kind of knows the Harper's Ferry. It's beautiful town. So they just had their municipal elections. So they elected town council and mayor. And the whole town's divided on this one issue, whether they want to build a new hotel at the site of this existing dilapidated hotel. It's abandoned. A lot of people are for it because they want the jobs and tax base, and then there's some people that are against it. But that was kind of the issue that came down for the election. And I just heard a story a couple days ago. The state Secretary of State's office for West Virginia sent a letter to the municipality saying that they were investigating their elections because there's been accusations of provisional ballots being incorrectly thrown out. There's accusations that people voted in the election who don't actually live here. And there's only like 200 voters. So 6 or 8 votes had the opportunity to change the outcome of the election. And it's weird to see how something so small like that, 6 or 8 votes, could change and alter the course of a town's future that could directly impact 300 people's lives. So for me, it's been fun. It's been a lot of fun. But Yeah, so you want to talk about maritime stuff, which I'm always up for.
No, I mean, I'm glad that you went into this subject because it's an important one. I was just thinking about, well, in Venice there had always been protests about bringing those cruise ships in there. And then, what was it, like a month ago? One of them actually just slammed into the dock.
Yeah, so the vessel reported an engine failure as it was approaching the dock, and the captain tried, from what I understood from the Italian authorities are still investigating it, but from what I understood, that there was an engine failure very close to the dock, the ship lost steering, they deployed the anchors, and it slowed the ship down, but not enough to prevent the collision. So the people filmed it on social media, both from the vessel that slammed into the dock and the people on the dock. It slammed into the dock at like an angle. The bow hit another smaller vessel that was moored up to the dock and slammed into the dock. So no one got killed, but if that small boat that had been moored had people in it, I mean, there would have been a lot of fatalities. The people are also worried about the environmental impacts. You know, there's different laws that govern when cruise ships can discharge waste and dunnage, and then those laws are often not followed. And then there's really not a huge penalty when they're not followed. I think it was Royal Caribbean or Carnival recently was taken to court about discharging waste too close to shores, and they just pretty much said, yeah, we did it. Okay, we're sorry. You know, it wasn't.
Why did this particular accident happen though? Was it like human error or?
From what I understand, it was just equipment failure in a bad set of circumstances. The steering, the engine failed, and the captain lost control of the ship at the worst possible time when they were approaching the dock. I don't think from reading the initial reports from the Italian Coast Guard, the captain did everything possibly could to avoid the collision. But, you know, with no steering, there's not much you can do. And there's radio communication. You know, he called the harbor master and things like that. So he did his best to let everyone know, hey, I'm going to hit the dock, I've lost steering. But it happened like at the worst possible moment, right on, you know, final approach, if you will. So that was the cause of that accident. Now, what caused the steering to fail, I don't think they've released that. I think they're probably still investigating that. It might take a couple months. And then, but earlier there was a couple months before that, there was a cruise ship that lost steering in a storm in the North Atlantic by Scandinavia. And you probably saw the videos from that. The people a lot of them had to be evacuated off the vessel was going to sink. Huh?
They evacuated people by helicopter, didn't they? Yeah,
by helicopter, and by a couple small boats as well. There was a massive helicopter evacuation. And the ship didn't actually capsize or sink. I think it was a preemptive thing.
And what do you make of the story that came out the other day about the 18-month-old child that fell out of the window on the cruise ship in Puerto Rico?
So weren't they at the dock?
Apparently, yes.
Yeah, I think there were accusations that someone was like holding them or they didn't let go. I think that's like a freak accident.
The dispute is, did the grandfather holding the child drop this kid out the window, or did she climb and fall out on her own? I
would think it'd be pretty hard unless you kind of set it up in a poor way that the child could climb out the window. But I have to look at the vessel, and it seems suspicious. But at the same time, if the guy's trying to drop the baby out of the cruise ship, why would you do it when it's docked? Unless you're the worst criminal ever.
I mean, I don't think, well, the police are investigating it, but I don't know if it's being investigated as a criminal matter right now. But the guy's attorney is saying that he did not drop the kid, that the kid fell out on its own, on her own.
Maybe she's just like a jacked 18-month-old.
And it's on it was on the Freedom of the Seas in San Juan, Puerto Rico.
So that's Royal Caribbean.
Yeah, the 11-4.
Oh, wow. 11th deck? And then a couple of days before that, there was a crew member on a carnival ship that went overboard, and the Coast Guard launched a rescue mission for that. I don't think they ever found that person, but they were part of the crew. If you look at the crew quarters, I mean, there's not a ton of space the crew has, but they can fall overboard. I mean, there's the, where all the anchor and the lines are kept, and then there's like the fantail of the vessel. But like a lot of the crew members are kind of confined to the innards of the ship.
Well, I'm looking at this article right now in Sky News, and they said that the little girl wanted to bang on the glass like she did at her older brother's hockey games. And the grandfather thought there was glass in the window, but apparently there wasn't. And so I guess what they're saying is she leaned forward and just fell out the window.
That's wild.
I mean, what window sill is so low on a ship that an 18-month-year-old is going over it?
The only thing I can think of, because I don't even think you could open the portholes in those cabins for reasons like that. Some of the cabins will have the balcony, and there might be a space between like the deck and the balcony railing, but I wouldn't imagine it could be that high. And I don't think the portholes in cabins open. So I don't think any of the portholes in a vessel opens. They only have the open deck, and that's about it, because they want to make, how could you watch it otherwise? So I can't think of, off the top of my head, I can't think of any windows that would be open. I can think of spots on the deck that are, have gaps in the railing. And there's a big thing right now, I actually wrote about it a couple months ago, for ships to install, it's called a man overboard system. It's essentially like a network of cameras that can form a 360-degree picture of the vessel. And if they see something go overboard, they can send out an alert. They're not mandatory right now, though. So some cruise lines have voluntarily implemented the manned overboard system, but there's no industry-wide mandate to do so. I think the way I read about it was the cruise lines are always adding more money into like water slides and a rock climbing gym, a golf course, and speed shoot, zip line, basic safety things like that. Unless they become forced upon the industry, they're going to be very hesitant to put them on, because it's a big cost expenditure with really no return on investment. I mean, I put in a really nice shuffleboard deck on my new vessels, and I can potentially entice more customers to sail. If I take the same amount of money and install a manned overboard system, which when you look at how many people go overboard from cruise ships, isn't like a terribly, it doesn't happen all the time. So how do you justify that? And if the government says, hey, if you don't want to have that, there's no penalty, then why would I do it? Because I'm a nice guy. It's a best practice thing.
With everything you've learned about maritime security and all the hijinks that go on cruise ships, I mean, would you ever take a cruise?
Yeah, I would.
Yeah.
But the thing about it is, number one, not anymore, I don't drink alcohol anymore. I think a lot of the issues that people have on cruise ships, and actually, when I talked to the author of The Truth About Cruise Ships about his experience working on them, I think what the majority of people get into trouble on cruise ships is that once they set foot on board, they lose their inhibitions because they don't have to do anything for themselves anymore. They don't have to cook, they don't have to clean, they don't have to travel anywhere, they're shuttled around the world. So they just get tagged and they lose that. It's a false sense of security. So they get way too drunk and then they make poor choices. Accidents happen, like with this. I don't know what happened with this 18-month-old falling overboard, but people do inadvertently fall overboard. But most of the time there's alcohol involved. There are fights, there are sexual assaults, and again, most of the time there's alcohol on board. But the thing about what you need to understand when you take a cruise is that just because your meals are taken care of, you don't have to travel anywhere, you still need to be on guard and be cognizant of what's going on, because you don't know the people that you're around. The people on the vessel have probably less of a responsibility to take care of you than you think they do. And you just need to, you really need to take responsibility for your own safety on board. So I would take one on guard. So that's the thing, I don't think that people should be afraid to take cruises by any means, because I think they're good vacations, and they're a good time, but you just, don't let your guard down just because you're on an exotic vacation. I mean, anytime you go out to sea, whether you're in a cruise ship or a fishing vessel, it's inherently dangerous. And the cruise lines do a lot of work to make you feel at home and make you feel pampered and make you feel safe. But at the end of the day, it's steel and it's wood and it's the open ocean. So just be safe about it. The only other thing I could think of that would deter someone to go on a cruise is the health aspect. The outbreaks of things like norovirus and things like that. And I don't know how that can necessarily be prevented. I know several years ago, the cruise lines had kind of a leeway before they could declare an epidemic. The vessel's crew doesn't change for 6 months or so. I mean, everyone on there's on a different contract, but the crew is more or less stationary on that vessel. It's the passengers that rotate in and out. So when you look at how a cruise line defines an epidemic, it has to be a certain percentage of all people on board showing symptoms over 3 different cruises or 3 different weeks or something like that. That's when they declare an epidemic. But there are programs in place to prevent outbreaks. But
has that ever happened before?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There was a horrible norovirus outbreak on a carnival ship, and they had to come back. Actually, it came back to Port Canaveral, and the ambulance service that I had done some clinicals with was hired to go transport people to the hospital.
Wow.
But that's the thing about cruise ships. I mean, you're isolated. It's a vessel. It's not as safe as people think. I mean, bad things can happen. There's no guarantee when you get on that. Your ticket does not guarantee that you're going to have a great time and that you're going to return back safe. Every chance that you take, anytime you get on a vessel in the ocean.
And there are certainly, young people who go on spring break down to Cancun and get drunk, and they end up drowning, they end up falling off the balcony, all sorts of, they get mugged and killed in the streets. I mean, these things happen, unfortunately. But when they happen in New Orleans too. I mean, every year I lived there people would go to the French Quarter, get really, really, really drunk, and literally disappear. I mean, disappear. No one ever saw them. They never found the body. They never know who took them. They don't even know what happened. They're just gone. Vanish off the face of the earth. It happens. It's a dangerous world, and people need to, no matter where they are on a cruise ship, in a different city, in your own town, don't ever assume that you're safe. But the difference being that, on a cruise ship, I mean, you're in this self-contained vessel in the middle of the ocean. It's a self-contained little ecosystem. And, if you fall off a balcony in a hotel, you might survive, depending on what floor you're on. But, if you go over the side into the ocean, unless you're on a cruise ship, that cruise ship can't turn on a dime and come back and get you.
Right. They have procedures to try to find people overboard, and they work with whatever Coast Guard happens to be the closest. A lot of times it's the U.S. and they will establish search patterns, but kind of once the search is taken over from the vessel and the master leaves, they go on, and the master has a lot of pressure from the corporate office and from other people on the ship to get to the port on time. So they're not going to spend it, because that cruise ship is not a rescue vessel. They have small crews attached to it, motor lifeboats and things they can use, but that's not their primary purpose. Don't expect the ship's going to be able to find you. Even if, right? There have been sailors that have fallen off U.S. Navy vessels. Operations cease until they find that they spend weeks trying to find the sailor. And even if that sailor's a great swimmer, if the sailor's a great swimmer and they survive the fall, right, they only have X amount of time they can be in the water, no matter how warm the water is. If it's less degrees of your body temperature, eventually you're going to have hypothermia. Eventually you get tired and drown. The ocean doesn't forgive. And just because you're on a boat that is a vacation doesn't mean you're any more safer. It doesn't mean you're safer. I don't think any more safer is the right way to say it. It doesn't mean you're safer. And I don't want to discourage people from taking cruises, but no, I mean, just be aware of the risks.
Well, and the other aspect to that, I know you've written about in the past, is that the legal aspects of what happens on a cruise ship. If someone's murdered, if someone's raped, the legal jurisdiction is very convoluted.
Yeah, and it's even worse when you talk about like commercial seafarers, like people that work full-time on container ships. That whole world is a lot more nefarious than the cruise world. But yeah, I mean, just because you leave from a U.S. port does not necessarily mean that you're going to be protected by U.S. law. What I did find out is the FBI requires cruise ships that port out of U.S. ports to report any type of illegal activity that they discovered to the FBI. But the FBI almost never does any of that information. They publish it, and that's about it. And there's no on-ship lawyer that's going to help you if you get in a bar fight in Cancun or Cozumel. You know, if you get caught trying to bring drugs back in Belize, you're going to be subject to Belizean law. Which is, I mean, just because the vessel is ported out of the U.S. doesn't, you know, it's number one, it's not a U.S. flag vessel, so it's not covered by U.S. law anyways, unless it's in U.S. territory. Just because you're a U.S. citizen doesn't necessarily guarantee you that you're going to be protected by U.S. law abroad. And people have learned that the hard way.
Yeah, I mean, that's like true across the board. There's so many Americans who like go overseas and they think that like American law, U.S. law like magically applies when they're in India.
Yeah.
I have my rights. Like, no, actually, you don't.
Yeah, like you voluntarily came to the country, you got your visa stamped, and now you're subject to their laws. Just because you have a U.S. passport, it's not half a square foot of U.S. sovereign territory. It's a piece of paper that lets you in the country. You're subject to their laws. And you know, it kind of reminds me again talking about New Orleans, which is almost in some ways a different country.
Your Napoleonic laws.
What?
Your Napoleonic legal system.
Yeah, well, yeah, the Louisiana legal system's on, but I remember I was on Bourbon Street with my wife, and we were going for a run. We were part of this running club back when I was in shape, and we went around the French Quarter to do a 5K every Wednesday. And I saw a guy get tossed out of a bar, and he told a cop, he was like, hey, that guy just punched me. And the cop looked at him and said, if you can't handle it, don't come down here. You know? So people have a false expectation of what can be done for them. And you really need to take that into your own hands. Especially when you're traveling abroad or, you know, in open water.
That's awesome, Joe. I think we've gone like over an hour already. Is there any other stories that you're working on that you'd like to talk about before we get going?
I wrote my first like EMS back in the day story this week at the urging of some people, and I'm curious to know what people thought of it. I'm curious to see if people read it, if people liked it. You know, it's not like I was in the military, so I don't have, you know, war stories. I have some stories from EMS, and I told one of the ones that I think to me means the most, and something I remember the most. So I'm curious to see how people like it, if they want more. If they don't like reading it, it's too depressing, which I totally understand. It's depressing to write about. Yeah. What'd you say?
Have you ever read Paul Ciolino's book about the history of paramedics in America?
No.
Let me pull it up real quick. I wrote a word for his book when it came out.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Ciolino.
I've read.
Here it is. It's called Dead in 6 Minutes. And it's like, you know, a lot of people have written like the history of the police department or the fire department in America, but I think his book was the first to ever really record the history of paramedics in the United States.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and you know, the paramedics in the U.S. it's so different between municipalities that it's hard to, I mean, some municipalities hire a company to do it, some do it themselves, like where I work for the county. Some, they work for the fire department, some are volunteer, like where I live right now, it's all volunteer. Some of them are hospital-based, so the hospital actually provides its own EMS service. And the paramedics can do different things between different states. I mean, states all have their own protocols, agencies all have their own protocols that are written by different physicians. I mean, there's the National Registry, which tries its best to standardize training, but it's still up to the states. So, paramedicine in the U.S. is an interesting topic. And there's actually a really good book called Paramedico. And the guy was an Australian paramedic, and he traveled around the world and worked with different EMS services. So he went to the UK, he went to Pakistan, he went to Mexico, and I think he went to South Africa. And he wrote about how different they are there. Versus a police department, they all kind of work off the Constitution first off, and then the state laws, and they all kind of operate in a similar manner. They have different tactics. But, the ambulance service is something completely different. I always called when I was in it, the redheaded stepchild of emergency services. And to some degree it is still.
Yeah, because I mean, you're not a cop, you don't have a badge and a gun, and when you show up in the hospital, the doctors are like, oh fuck, like, get out of here. Like,
yeah. Unless you make a point to, I mean, the thing with the doctors is, if you're a good paramedic and you make a good point of letting the doctors know that, they're going to trust you. If you're a bad one, they're going to shit all over you.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's the flip side of it, right?
And rightfully so. I mean, if you're bad at your job, like, it's up to the doctor to tell you that, hey, like I remember one time I was working in the ER, and they brought in a patient who had been intubated. So they've been what we call rapid sequence intubation. That's essentially knocking someone unconscious with drugs, paralyzing them with drugs, and then putting a breathing tube down their throat so that we can breathe for them with the bag about the mask. And it's two different drugs that paralyze and anesthetize. And you have to do the dosage for each of those drugs separately because they're based on the patient's weight, And if you do it wrong, you might have a patient who's completely immobile and paralyzed, but is 100% awake and conscious.
Oh shit.
Yeah, so the guy brought this woman in, she was an old woman, and they put her in the bed, and the doctor asked, what drugs they had given in route, and they told him, and he said, yeah, this woman's completely awake right now because she's not anesthetized. And they were like, no, and he was like, no, you don't understand how these drugs work. Like, this is the big fuck up. And I never saw those guys again. I didn't work for that same agency, but.
That's horrifying.
Yeah, it was pretty horrifying.
Well, I mean, mostly for that old woman. I mean, holy shit.
Yeah, and what do you do if you're paralyzed and you hear that? I mean, are you just like, let me move or take me out? I don't know. And seeing people that are innovative like that it can be pretty scary, there were a couple times in the ER when we'd have someone innovative like that, and you'd walk over and they'd be crying. They're like, maybe not crying, but tearing up, you try to dab the tears off their face and say like, hey, it's gonna be okay. There's rumors out there that even when you're paralyzed like that, you can still hear things. I mean, I don't know, man. This was really the first time I really wrote about it, and it was a lot tougher than I thought. This incident that happened to me, that not happened to me, but that I was a witness of happened 8 years ago, and it stuck with me for a long time, and it was writing about it kind of brought back a lot of emotions that I thought I dealt with, and it almost was to the point where like I don't even want to write this, like I'm fucking myself up. At the same time, I think it's good every once in a while to revisit those experiences and feel those emotions as uncomfortable as they can be,
What is the name of the article if people want to go find it?
I think it was my first bad day as a volunteer firefighter. So that's when I was still a volunteer with the city of Midway in Florida. It reminds me, this is the last thing I'll say, because I just wrote another one about 10 songs during the Vietnam War and how they were not at all the songs that I think the soldiers were listening to, and how there's a big disconnect. But there's a quote in Michael Harris' book, which I referenced in that article, and like I said, I read that book at least once a year, oftentimes 2 or 3, and I think it's just, for me, it's a really good book, and there's a quote in there that he says that you're as responsible for everything you see as you are everything you do. And I think that really applies to the story I wrote about, because even though I didn't cause the accident, I didn't hurt anybody, I'm still responsible for the fact that I was there and witnessed it, and you still have to deal with those same emotions.
The article is, so there I was, my first bad day as a volunteer firefighter.
Yeah, if you're looking for a bummer, it's there. It's not.
I'm glad you wrote it, man. I'm going to go read it myself this afternoon.
Yeah, the editing staff did a good job making it flow better. Yeah, but this was fun, Jack.
Yeah, thanks for coming on at short notice, Joe. You were the first guest for episode 0.
Yeah, I'm honored. When you figure out a name for this thing.
Yeah, well, when I figure out what the hell we're doing on this live stream too, I don't even know what the topics are going to be.
Let me know. I can come back. This is, I don't know how you feel about it, but if you want to do like a regular disaster type thing, I could come on once a month. And
yeah, that's right. You had mentioned that before. I think that would be great. You wanted to cover like man-made disasters or natural disasters.
Yeah. Like shipwrecks, plane crashes, floods, things like that. I think it's really interesting. There's only one other podcast that I've heard out there that really does it, and I think we could do probably a better job.
I can think of like there'd be like some interesting ones you could do on like speculation, like what if,
Yeah.
Like what if there was a coup in America? What would that look like?
Yeah, see, that'd be really interesting. That's a topic that I thought about a lot, especially in this political climate. Some guy just did a story about, or he did a podcast, what a civil war in the U.S. would look like, but it was so far left-leaning that it was almost like unlistenable. I mean, and not that I'm like some right-wing guy, I'm pretty neutral, try to see things in shades of gray, but this one was so left-leaning that it was like, man, this is really hard to listen to. I mean, not that I'm like trying to shit on what the guy does.
We can save it for another time, but I mean, I have talked to people who have been involved in essentially drawing up secret plans and how the government would respond if that ever happened. Like, what if the Air Force revolted and took control of nuclear stockpiles? What do we do?
Dr. Strange.
And it, when you hear about that kind of stuff, it makes you realize like governments, and our government even, they're all much more fragile than they let on.
They are, and what I've really learned, reporting on local stuff, is that governments and corporations are nothing more than people. They're just different names for people. So when you talk about, the company's coming in and doing this, you're talking about people that are making decisions. I mean, same thing with the government. The government's not some separate entity that acts. It's not a sentient being. It's a collection of human beings that have human thoughts and human weaknesses and human motivations. So
I do all kinds of stupid stuff.
Yeah, people forget that.
Well, thank you again, Joe. It was great having you on, and we can do something more regular. Have you on regularly. We bat around some ideas about talking about like man-made and natural disasters. I think that'd be really cool.
Yeah, and if anyone's listening and has a disaster in mind they want us to research and talk about, let us know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, likewise. If there's any listeners out there who have any topic requests or anything like that, feel free to drop those on us because I will take the suggestions, and if it's something we can speak to intelligently or semi-intelligently, I'll definitely consider that.
Awesome. All right, sir.
All right. Thank you, Joe. Joe. Have a good day. Have a good weekend. And I'll talk to you again soon, okay?
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Jack.
All right. Take care. All right. So I guess that wraps up episode 0 of what we're probably going to call this podcast. It's Murphy's Law. Let's see. A couple people chiming in here in the comments. Very good evening to you from across the pond. What have I missed? We talked about a whole bunch of different things. We talked a lot about cruise ships and maritime law. We talked about small town newspapers versus large town newspapers in metropolitan areas. Sorry if this isn't the most interesting live stream that we've ever done or that I've ever done, but I think we will improve as we go. So I guess that's it, guys. I'm going to call this one good and kill the stream. It'll be up on YouTube. You guys can, watch it at your leisure. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Hit that little bell notification so you get notifications whenever we go live. I haven't even figured out what our schedule is going to be quite yet, but I think at least once a week I'll try to hammer down an actual time for people who want to tune in. So that's all I got for you this afternoon, and we'll do it again soon.